welcome. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and those of you who are watching from home. Before we get started, we ask that you please silence your cell phones. Tonight, we welcome Brian Truzzi. Brian is the Historic Sites Supervisor for the Chesterfield County Parks and Recreation Department. He is originally from Ohio and moved to Virginia in 1992. He first began employment with the Parks and Recreation Department in 1995 as a senior recreation specialist with the history section responsible for planning and conducting historical programming, and in 2015 was reclassified as a principal recreation specialist. He has served as the supervisor for 3 part-time staff since 2010. He holds an Associate's of Applied Sciences in Recreation and Wildlife Management and an undergraduate degree from Penn State University, receiving a Bachelor's of Arts and Sciences in Natural Resources and a minor in History. He resides in Midlothian with his wife. So tonight we welcome Brian Truzzi for this evening's program, Victory Gardens.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And it's nice to be able to come back. I was here, I guess 2 or 3 months ago. I think that might have been a presentation on the history of coal mining. I'm not sure. So it's nice to be back to offer you folks a different presentation. And I thought with spring around the corner here, and almost going into summer now, already midway through April, a topic on Victory Gardens would be appropriate as everyone starts to think about getting outside and planting flowers, and trees are coming into bloom, and unfortunately all this pollen that we have isn't a positive sign of that. But thinking about Victory Gardens and the impact that Victory Gardens had during World War I and World War II. And when we think of the impact of Victory Gardens, they really evolved certainly during World War I, but heavily during World War II. And when Woodrow Wilson was heading up the U.S. Food Administration, there was a desire to get as many people as possible to plant their own gardens, to take as much of the impact off of relying too heavily on food stamps and rationings, and being able to grow fruits and vegetables to help the war effort as well, not only at home, but also for the troops abroad. So this was going to be a huge push to really get everyone involved with experimenting with gardening. And as you'll see here, particularly during the World War II period, the impact of gardening in this country here was really going to be such a huge success, not only for families, but also really trying to educate children within the schools, and having people grow their own gardens at any place where there was any piece of open ground available. So during both these periods here, there was such a huge push to really focus on this effort, and it really had lasting impacts for this country. And now, certainly, Victory Gardens aren't a huge push presently, but as we get to the end here, we certainly have seen a lot of impacts that have come about since the COVID pandemic, and we're certainly still feeling a lot of the impacts of a lot of aspects to that, where we could certainly consider possibly looking at trying to have a resurgence of Victory Gardens, but for different reasons. Obviously, with a lot of the supply chain issues that we're certainly experiencing, and other impacts. A lot of people like to have a lot of different food from different areas, and a lot of people are concerned about pesticides on their foods, etc. A lot of people like to go with more organic foods. So certainly there is a desire to maybe do that. So in 1917, there was a huge effort to work with the schools throughout the country and the Department of Education to educate school-age children about the need to have victory gardens and come up with really unique marketing campaigns on the child's level to really help them understand how they can help their parents, their grandparents during these periods here, and really get them involved in a fun and an educational way. And it really paid off. It really paid off dividends. So just about every school across the country was encouraged to actually have victory gardens on the school grounds. As we'll see here in a bit, even people who lived in the large urban areas, in large areas like New York City, Chicago, where there wasn't a whole lot of open area, they're going to be converting tops of large skyscrapers and apartment complexes to actually incorporate victory gardens as well. So there was a huge push for that. So there was a lot of way that they could really try to let children know, the impact of helping their parents with a successful garden, to really have less of a demand on foods and do a lot of canning, and have their own fresh fruits and vegetables at the home, less that they would have to buy in the stores, and coming up with really sort of creative ways to sort of look at different things here with various different types of pests that can impact a lot of the vegetables and fruits like squash and zucchini and corn, and focus on some of the bugs that hit potatoes and various different types of worms that'll impact the fruits and vegetables. So they came up with some really creative ways to reach out to the children. And this is, when you think about maybe some larger urban areas where you may have large communal facilities where people may share open areas. These are great examples of victory gardens that were very popular compared to maybe people that live in the country and have large farms. In other areas, they were encouraging a lot of families that maybe live in row houses to have an open plot of ground, and then all these families sort of share that area, and they create their own and are responsible for their own area to care for the fruits and vegetables. So certainly during the World War I period, this was the first attempt to do that, which was extremely successful. And then, as you all know, that was even more of a need during the World War II period to really have a lot of these victory gardens, to really focus on that. So by 1942, of course, we have a new food rationing program, and people are issued these rationing booklets and stamps, and they're actually allocated certain types of meats per week, different types of fruits and other consumable products that they would need to make their meals for their families. Well, if the thought was if every family could have their own garden, then that is less of a demand they're going to need on the rationing books, and that can be more food that can go to our troops abroad, which were going to be first and foremost to make sure that the fighting men and women abroad are going to be able to get what they needed. So they're encouraging citizens, every family, to plant their own garden. And depending on the population of certain areas would determine the size of a plot that they're encouraging people to actually propagate and take care of. So whether you lived in an urban area, you lived in the country and had a farm, or wherever, they're trying to find as many open areas that were unutilized and encourage all of these victory gardens to prop up. So these are some more of the marketing campaigns that were going to be really hitting all storefronts. Anytime you would go in the local community, at a hardware store, shopping center, Open Your Home and Garden magazine, there are going to be a lot of advertisements like this to really try to encourage people to get involved with their own individual victory garden. And they tried to sort of really convey that, it's a patriotic duty for here on the home front, and that's a way that we can really help our troops abroad, and try to really tie that in as a patriotic service for the general public. So the more items that people could grow in their victory gardens and put on the table and do canning is helpful, but there's a lot extra that's going to be left over that the families themselves can consume, and so they don't want anything to go to waste, so they can actually encourage families to produce a lot in their gardens that could then be gathered and produced, and that can go to our troops abroad. So certainly canning efforts were a huge part of this process, and as you'll see here, there were some local families here in the region that were canning a lot of produce, a lot of fruits that really made a big difference. So they really encouraged everyone to sort of do their part and get involved with this, regardless of what sort of gardening experience people may have had. And there were a lot of gardening classes that would be offered by the local 4-H clubs, extension offices that can help people really get involved with that. This is a news article from the Times-Dispatch from 1943, really focusing on the importance of people getting involved, having their own victory garden here, and really touting the impacts of even a small little plot of ground and the impact that they can have by growing their own produce. And if you expand that by 100, 1,000, 10,000 families, the impact of that is going to be enormously felt, and certainly would be. Here's some more examples of the bountiful harvest that they're touting with having your own victory garden. And a lot of these places, storefronts would have these large posters, almost like the bond drives that you'd see during World War II. The popularity of having these victory gardens and encouraging them with every family to really get involved with that. These are some another ad here, newspaper article from the dated 1944, and certainly, Eleanor Roosevelt had a victory garden on the south lawn of the White House. We know that other first ladies were going to be utilizing these for different purposes. Michelle Obama really was promoting these, but for different purposes, obviously helping and trying to educate families and people who may not be able to get a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables to get families involved to do that and to provide better fruits and vegetables on the tables for maybe families less fortunate that may not be able to get access to those. So she was a huge supporter of that. But some of the details here in this article talks about the scarcity and abundance of that. Department of Agriculture survey showed that 42% of fresh vegetables consumed in 1943 came from victory gardens alone. So the impact of these victory gardens, starting from the beginning of World War II to the middle stages of the war, were going to be really, the ripples were going to be wide felt here. And the impacts of these were going to be enormous. So, and that's just really locally here. And a lot of other large cities were going to see a lot of the same impacts of that. This gives you an idea here nationwide In 1941, there were over 14.5 million Victory Gardens in this country alone. And by 1943, over 21 million Victory Gardens. So you take that by individual families. With towns greater than 100,000 residents, they were recommending basically 500 square foot area per Victory Garden. So a 20-foot by 25-foot area with each family in these large populations. If every family had a Victory Garden of that size, that was going to have a huge impact. For communities with less than 100,000, 3,800 square foot area, and then for people who had large open areas that had a farm, a lot of land, they're recommending about a half an acre in size. In 1943 alone in Richmond, the goal was to have roughly about 13,000 Victory Gardens, and basically one for every household here. So there was a huge push here and a really unique goal and template for every family, depending on where they lived, as to what size of a Victory Garden they should have. And so by 1943, there were 20 million Victory Gardens in this country alone. And they were really going going full bore, and everyone was really getting involved with this and making a lot of sacrifices and having a huge tangible impact in regards to that. And nearly a third of all the vegetables that were consumed literally within 1943, just that year, they produced 8 million tons of food in this country. So these we truly were going to be a success any way you looked at it. And people were really embracing the idea of having these Victory Gardens, and even school-age children were catching on and doing their part as well. Within the Richmond area here, just give you some statistics in terms of the volume of fresh fruits and produce that were going to be produced from a number of these Victory Gardens. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of 4-H education classes were going to be organized at the grassroots level, locally, to help people, give them the tools, the information they needed to have a successful Victory Garden. So they played a huge role. A lot of the local Girl Scout troops, Boy Scout troops were actively involved as well as the children in the schools. Close to 5,500 Victory Gardens just within the Richmond region alone in 1942. So it clearly did have a huge impact on the outcome of that. Some little bit more of some local success stories here. This lady here, they're recommending for a lot of people who had these Victory Gardens, they're touting the impact of using pine tags within the furrowed rows of your Victory Gardens, which really helps cushion on the knees when you're bending down to tend to a lot of your crops. So in between the rows, and they're getting their children, their grandchildren involved to help them with this, lining the individual rows of their plants with these pine tags, and it makes a nice cushion for that. And trying to find really unique ways to get children to help their families, and before they know it, the children are involved, and they're finding it a fun educational way to help their parents or grandparents. At such a young age, they may not realize the role or impact that these Victory Gardens serve, but they clearly do are finding ways to get the young children involved with that. This is a great scene here. We think about the large urban cities, and where we don't find as many areas of open ground to scratch an area to put Victory Gardens. Where are we going to put them? Well, they're going to go on these high-rise apartment complexes right on the roof. Because there were scarcity of certain materials, such as a lot of metal products. Later on, it was going to be hard to get chicken wire, fencing wire to put around your garden unless you could actually make a case that you actually have livestock or poultry. And you would have a ration coupon in order to purchase those. But so when you have these large urban areas, then they're going to be using lumber here to make a small box here. As you can see, many of these are very small. But maybe assigning a particular individual child or children of a family to maintain one individual little box here for their victory garden, and you multiply that by all these high-rise buildings in large urban cities, and you can clearly see the impact that that would have. And even as small as a flower box outside front of a window on a large building. They were thinking of any potential ways they could incorporate these. So there were a variety of different sizes in order to accomplish this. Another great example, marketing here in thinking of the canning of all of the fruits and produce here. Canning fresh fruit, making tomato sauce, etc., and the impacts that can have for families. So they really organized a huge marketing effort with a lot of these posters to really push that as much as possible. It's believed that about 75% of women preserving food by canning in 1943. That led to about 4 billion jars of food in this country. So from its humble beginnings from the start of World War I to really pushing ahead to the Second World War, by 1943, this country was really humming, and everyone was coming together for that one concerted effort. On the home front, everyone was pulling their weight, doing whatever they could to contribute to that. This article here focused on one lady who canned over 482 quarts of vegetables in 1 year alone. So they were going to be focusing on a lot of individual little success stories like that, and that would really give credence and really help others to say, well, if this lady can do that from her garden at her house, why couldn't I accomplish the same thing? And sort of a friendly, competitive generosity effort that would really be developing and snowballing across the country here. Little individual items such as that. Examples of coupons like this one here for sugar, obviously, if you have a lot of fruit that you're canning and you're going to be needing sugar for preservation of a lot of those the jars of fruit, people could sort of see, okay, well, I have so many coupons that I have this week alone. What am I going to need to put food on the table? How much sugar am I going to need? And basically, they were trying to give people an idea to sort of pace themselves and map out a lot of the crops that they're going to be growing in their victory gardens, and looking at the state of how fast certain crops are going to grow, such like corn. So they're recommending to people to sort of pace their crops that they're going to be planting and not plant, say, an entire area of corn at one point in time. Give it maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then you plant some more corn. So it's sort of like thinking about farmers today and sort of rotating their crops. And so we don't have one area of having corn that's going to be harvested all at the same time. We're going to spread that out. So later on, one of the things that we're going to see is there's going to be a shortage on a lot of the products that a lot of the farmers are going to need, and to try to keep their fruits and produce from being eaten by deer and other varmints, they're not going to be able to get a lot of the fencing wire that they're going to need to put around that garden. So basically they're recommending secondhand lumber in some cases to actually put a perimeter around their gardens to a certain degree. And really the only ones who would really be able to get that wire, as I mentioned earlier, would be those who could actually make a case that they have poultry and other livestock. And they would actually have to make a case for that they really needed that wire for a particular purpose or reason. And of course, there's going to be a variety of rationing of meats and cheeses and oils, and every particular week, families have a certain number of points with the blue and red stamps, their rationing stamps that they would have available for them. And so the goal is, if they can supplement that from what they're growing in their garden, that's less they need to purchase for the family, and that makes more of these fruits and vegetables available for our servicemen abroad. So looking at trying to have less demand on a lot of these items at the markets, and doing more for ourselves. And just some other articles here in regards to some of the different food stamps and rationing programs that existed. This one here dating to 1943, just focusing on going through the alphabet, and at one point, certain names that are very common, like they focus here on the Smiths, leading to roughly about 5,000 families of that name alone, and when they're going to be issued their food stamps or rationing stamps, and trying to spread that out so there's not such a huge demand at one particular point in time. Whether we're talking about Henrico, Hanover, Chesterfield County, etc., looking at the demand for a lot of these products was going to really tax the country here. So the more people who had Victory Gardens, and we have every family that has one, that is going to make more available to families. So hopefully there won't be any shortages of anything. Some other little educational cartoons that were a really popular marketing campaign that we can sort of help allow the children to sort of identify with, looking at Meatless Mondays, Wheatless Wednesdays, etc., and looking at types of food that families could buy on certain days of the weeks with their rationing stamps. One of the other things we're talking about is trying to combat a lot of the pests that are going to be a huge eyesore for a lot of the crops. And certainly during the spring, from various years, we all deal with Japanese beetles. We have aphids that attack certain plants and crops. Rusts and different worms. So they're trying to tie in, fighting the Japanese beetle here, and try to have the most successful produce and crops that we can have with our Victory Gardens, and tying that in, focusing on the war and the aggression, and tying in with a two-stage battle here, fighting the Japanese beetle and also fighting our Axis enemy, the Japanese army at that point. There were a lot of really unique articles that are coming out to try to educate people to do everything they can to combat and have a healthy crop, and get as much success from their vegetables that they're growing in their Victory Gardens, and how to deal with fighting a lot of these common pests without, at that point, the mass use of pesticide, insecticide like we think of today. So there was a lot of helpful advice that was out there to help people with having the most successful gardens that they possibly can, and not put a huge drain or demand on the war effort for the troops abroad. There was a lot of articles in the local newspapers, like you see here, that would be very helpful to help encourage that. And this is sort of a great example of what I was talking about earlier, talking about trying to encourage people to change the period in which they're actually planting a lot of their crops. So not to have like corn all growing at the same time. Have one planting of corn in your garden, and then space that out, and then have another few more rows of corn that you're growing, so it all doesn't come at the same height and all doesn't need to be harvested at the same time. They're trying to encourage people to experiment with a variety of different types of crops and spread out the plantings of those in terms of the time periods for that. So there was a lot of really helpful advice that was going to be provided to families to make this as much of a successful production as possible. And even the local fire departments were getting involved with this, not just encouraging plantings of victory gardens at homes and schools, but a lot of the police departments, fire departments were encouraged to actually plant victory gardens on their site where their fire stations would be. So when they come back from fighting a fire, they're trading in all of their equipment for hose, and they're maintaining their own victory garden at the firehouse, at the police station. So they can grow their own produce, their fruits, to feed the firemen, and et cetera. And so they're really trying to think of every particular entity or group of people that could actually have time and be productive to have their own victory gardens, not just individual families here. So this really was a huge push, and really ended up being a large success in the long run. Really just focusing on having as many victory gardens as possible for a lot of other businesses during that time period. And you see a lot of particular ads in Sears and Roebuck with a variety of different types of seed packets that people could buy. And they tried to actually package those in bulk and look at some of the more popular seeds that people would need to plant. And trying to have a wide variety of fruits and vegetables they could put on their dinner table. So you would, this was really quite common in the Sears and Roebuck catalog to see, I like to see some of the prices of some of these seed packets back in the 1940s here, and the variety of different packets that you could actually purchase for your individual victory garden. And even going so far as to see a lot of some of the ads and the prices for hand tools compared to what we pay today when we go to a hardware store or Lowe's or Home Depot to buy a shovel or a rake, garden rake, $1.19 in 1943, a spade fork, $1.19, all of these garden hose, 79 cents. You look at the prices now with inflation, and even sometimes you go, lucky if you can find something when you go to a hardware store due to this supply chain issue we're still facing today. We're facing a really different, some different difficulties now, although certainly nowhere near the difficulty of having a country involved in a major world war. Looking at a lot of the different ads that existed in 1943, and even going so far as Miller and Rhodes selling particular clothing for people to work in the gardens. And this is one of the ones that I loved here from Miller and Rhodes. A lot of the particular, they're marketing a lot of clothing for the ladies when they're working out in the gardens. And it's really great to be able to see some of these ads that have been preserved and really, trying to market and find things appropriate to something that's really taking this country by storm. So credit Miller and Rhodes for sort of thinking outside the box back then and rebranding something that women are going to be needing, specific clothes to work in the gardens, etc. So that was really interesting there. Just some photos here of some local individuals who had very successful victory gardens, many of these could be large families. These two ladies here who had very successful victory gardens in the Richmond area, sort of touting a lot of the similar clothing items that I just showed you on the last slide with Miller and Rhodes in regards to clothing that's really going to be more conducive for doing a lot of that outside work, and particularly in the heat of the Virginia summertime as well, with something like that. And we know that John Adams really had one of the earliest victory gardens at the White House, okay? And certainly Thomas Jefferson was going to really follow suit and recognize the importance of that alone. So, prior to President Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, we did see some of our earlier presidents that realized the importance of having something like that as well when they were in the White House. Just looking at the impacts of everything here, Eleanor Roosevelt really touting the importance of a victory garden, and she obviously worked with the staff there and had a rather large victory garden when the Roosevelts were in the White House as well, and that just that continued on. The First Lady of Virginia, Governor Darden, also had a victory garden in the governor's mansion yard. I'm not sure how many of the other First Ladies who have resided there have sort of continued that tradition, but certainly she actually had a successful victory garden during World War II. And of course, I mentioned about Michelle Obama, with her desire to really, educate children and families and be able to try to have a really good balanced diet for children, and particularly families that may not be able to have that ability to put a really good supply of fruits and vegetables on the tables. We see that today in certain localities where communities are starting to embrace this idea of similar to victory gardens again, where people will share a plot of land and try to raise some fruits and vegetables. She was a strong supporter of that, encouraging a lot of good health and providing a variety of good vitamins on the dinner table for children as well. So. Even during the Obamas, when they were in the White House, were strong supporters of victory gardens. So when we think about the impacts that victory gardens had on our country here, certainly was wide felt. And when we think about where we go now, as I mentioned earlier, when we think about all these supply chain issues and other issues that we're dealing with, the victory is going to be different for us now. We aren't waging a war with Germany and Japan, but we're fighting other battles. And having a victory garden could help us, we see the high price of gasoline. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people now, some people really like to go with the organic aspect because for many people it's healthier for them. They don't have to deal with as many pesticides or insecticides on their fruit and vegetables. Now, when you go to the supermarket, you pay a lot more for the organic. There's no doubt about that. But there is a huge concern with food safety. So maybe this is another idea, another era where we try to push something similar to Victory Gardens. Maybe we call it something completely different. But times certainly have changed. But maybe there's a need to really embrace this effort once again. Certainly, maybe not on the scale that we saw, 70 some years ago. But clearly, there could be a need for that again today. So I thank you for having me come out and share with you some of the history of Victory Gardens, and be more than happy to answer any questions anyone may have. Yes.
Have you seen our garden up on the hill?
I have not, no. I'm sure it's probably quite impressive.
Well, I guess you'd call it an organic garden.
Okay. And yeah, so I mean, there are a number of people that really do prefer, the organic fruits and vegetables. It's I guess it's just a matter of personal preference or taste for people. But yeah, it's great that you all have now. Do many of you play a role or help the staff here in terms of that particular garden, or?
You can have your own plots.
Oh, excellent. Okay, nice. Well, that's I could see where that would be very beneficial as well. Definitely.
Yeah, there's a huge portion that is Covenant Woods farm. Yeah, farm to table.
Okay.
And then there are separate plots that people can have each year to put in what they wish.
Oh, that's a wonderful idea. I'm glad to see that, and they encourage that. That is terrific. That is great. I'm sure many of the residents really take that on and utilize that opportunity. That is terrific. I'm glad to hear that. I don't know if many other facilities offer that to the residents or not, but I'm glad that they do here. That's terrific. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate you having me out, and enjoy your upcoming spring. Looks like we have some nice warm weather upcoming here this week. This rain will move out tonight, and hopefully reveal some blue skies tomorrow and sunshine again. A very dreary day, but I appreciate having me out tonight. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming out, and those who are watching from home. And a big thank you to Brian Chusey for informing us about Victory Gardens. One more round of applause.
Oh, good. That is encouraging. I am glad to hear that. Okay.
Yeah, it's really nice. 15,000 pounds of really?
Yes.
That they produce every year from the garden?
It's just getting started 2 or 3 years ago. He's been here.
Wow.